Unfortunately, our country has maintained a tradition of interventionism until practically yesterday, and this accounts for the long-standing relative underdevelopment of Spain with respect to the other countries in the European Union. In Spain, being an entrepreneur has traditionally been frowned upon. Entrepreneurship has been stifled for centuries, since the Spanish Golden Age, in fact. Read the classic Spanish works from that period. In the 16th century, the three possible sources of work for a young Spanish man were the church, the sea, and the crown. Those were the options. A man could enter the church, he could cross the sea to the Americas to seek his fortune, or he could serve the king in the military. It was no one's ideal in life to work in the fields, in a small artisan's workshop, or in trade. One reason, among others, was that if someone got his hands dirty working, or devoted himself to trade, or to operating a small artisan's workshop, he was sure to be immediately labeled a new Christian. In other words, he would be associated with Jews and Moriscos, Muslim converts to Christianity, who worked in trade and enterprise. For almost 800 years, Spain fought against Muslim invaders. Americo Castro, in La Realidad Histórica de España, explains that after all of those centuries, without realizing it, we ended up imitating the worst flaws of our enemies. We ended up internalizing something which is characteristic of Islam, namely the waging of holy war against the infidel. And when we drove out Islam, we had to keep fighting the infidel, whether in North Africa or in the Americas, or within our own borders. We went after the infidel. Though Christians, we became like Islamists without noticing it. There is also the obsession with blood purity, typical of the Jewish people. We ultimately internalized that as well. Nobody could obtain an important government position without being screened for blood purity. One had to get a certificate. They were all forged, because if anything characterizes the blood of the Spanish, it is that it has been thoroughly mixed with that of the Jews and Moriscos. There was no liberal revolution in Spain, except a very fleeting one, which coincided with the glorious revolution of 1868. The Canovist restoration was a restoration of interventionism, tariffs and regulations. And that is not to mention the dictatorship of Primo de Rivera, or the short-lived Republic, or General Franco. Interventionism and socialism, pure and simple. It was only after the Stabilization Plan of 1959 that the windows were opened to let in a little of the fresh air of the market economy, and with brilliant results. But the principal institutions, social security and the great rigidity of the Spanish labor market, both of which we have inherited from Franco, have not been effectively dismantled by any of the democratic administrations. Interventionism has been maintained, and it was only when Spain entered the European Union that economic liberty increased in relative terms, something which has already had a spectacular influence on the economic development of our country. Even so, recent polls show that among young Spanish university students, the idea of being an entrepreneur has yet to catch on. Few young people want to be entrepreneurs. Most want Papa State to solve all their problems. They want to take a public exam, get an easy job, avoid taking risks, and have everything guaranteed. Montesquieu identified the three capital sins of Spanish people as sloth, cruelty, look at Goya's The Disasters of War, and envy. And in Spain, success is frowned upon and immediately arouses envy. We are very envious people. This clashes culturally with the attitudes of people from other countries. If you visit the United States, you will find that winners are admired there. I lived in the US for 3 years, and I saw that when a person is successful in that country, everyone immediately wants to help her continue to be successful, and she is seen as a role model. However, in Spain, prizes are awarded only posthumously, or if everyone finds out a person has terminal cancer. There is so much envy in our country that it is common knowledge that certain very prestigious prizes, I will mention none in particular, must be awarded to foreigners. For every time they are given to a Spanish person, his or her colleagues become so envious that they break out in hives. This also contributes greatly to the discrediting of entrepreneurship and of the entrepreneurial spirit in Spain. However, things are gradually changing. If we compare the current situation in Spain to the one that existed 35 or 40 years ago when I began my academic life, then clearly a lot of progress has been made in the right direction, though we still have a long way to go. What are the essential measures to be taken? Years ago, I published an important article on the subject in several newspapers, El País and others. The article was called Un programa para la economía española, a plan for the Spanish economy. To tell you the truth, I published it over 35 years ago, and it is still relevant, because I repeat the same thing every year. I wrote, first of all, that we should immediately do away with inflation and reduce public spending. Spain later entered the European Union. Responsibility for monetary policy rests no longer with Spanish authorities, but with European ones. Still, the goal of no credit expansion remains a priority in order to avoid crises, and reductions in public spending, that is, austerity in the public sector, is fundamental. Second, I wrote that we should liberalize the economy as much as possible, especially the labor market. This is where we have the most progress to make. The unemployment rate in Spain is always twice as high as in the surrounding countries, precisely because our labor market is twice as rigid. Everyone knows what has to be done, but no one dares to bell the cat, politically speaking. Instead, politicians focus on keeping social peace, and that is a euphemistic way of referring to the problems highlighted by the public choice school, which we have just studied. Third, I wrote that we should lower taxes. Some progress has been made in this area, particularly from the Aznar years onward. A reform was adopted, and the progressive income tax was lowered. The highest rate, 56%, was reduced to 40%, in keeping with all the other tax reforms introduced in Western countries since the Reagan tax revolution. The inheritance tax was eliminated de facto in almost all of Spain's autonomous regions, and the Socialist Party abolished the wealth tax in 2008, though it was later re-established. Some progress has been made, though we still have a long way to go. Unfortunately, due to the crisis, the authorities took the opportunity to raise the VAT rate from 16 to 18%, and later to 21%. Also, another very mistaken measure, they increased the tax on income from movable capital, which is precisely the opposite of what they should have done, since it is important now to encourage the accumulation of capital. So in the future, when you hear a politician defending reducing the role of the state, cutting public spending, lowering taxes, and liberalizing the economy, especially the labor market, that is the candidate to vote for, because that is the direction we need to move in. Sadly, few politicians will speak in this way, and if they do defend these steps, they will do so timidly and will have little power to change anything. However, at least now you have some guidelines that indicate the correct and appropriate path.